December 19, 1944. A clearing outside the ruined Philippine town of Ormoc. The tropical air is thick with cordite and rot. Smoke hangs low, twisting between palm trunks shattered by artillery. A group of Japanese female prisoners of war, captured nurses, and clerks from a field hospital are herded under guard toward an assembly point. They are silent, their uniforms torn, their faces streaked with mud and ash. And then, through the haze, they see them. American soldiers emerging from the tree-line. Giants in olive drab, helmets glinting, rifles slung, radios crackling with a steady stream of orders. The women freeze, eyes widening in disbelief. These are not the thin, hollow-eyed adversaries of Japanese propaganda. These are men well-fed, confident, and carrying more gear than they thought possible for a single soldier. One nurse would later whisper in shock, "They look like they had stepped out of another world." U.S. Army After-Action Report, December 1944, for the captives. This was the first close glimpse of the war's other face. A force that had landed on Leyte in October with more ships than the Japanese Empire could dream of fielding. General Douglas MacArthur's promise, "I shall return," was now fulfilled by a torrent of steel and manpower. The American ground forces advancing through the Philippines numbered over 200,000 men, supported by naval task forces larger than entire fleets of other nations. Naval War College Review, 1947. To the weary prisoners, the scale was incomprehensible. Even the rations the soldiers carried, cans of Spam, powdered eggs, and chocolate, seemed like luxuries from another planet, but beyond the sheer numbers. It was the aura of abundance and coordination that unsettled them. Each GI carried not just a rifle but also grenades, entrenching tools, medical kits, and radios. Behind them rolled columns of Sherman tanks, their engines coughing smoke, treads grinding coral and clay into dust. Trucks followed, loaded with supplies stacked like miniature warehouses on wheels. The Japanese women stared at the strange sight. Soldiers who never seemed hungry, never seemed ragged, and could call down artillery with a few clipped words into a handset. Signal Corps Photo, 1945. In that moment, they realized they were confronting not just an army, but an entire industrial nation walking on legs of steel. The contrast could not have been sharper. By late 1944, the Japanese garrisons in the Philippines were starving. Rice rations had collapsed to less than 500 grams a day. Soldiers trapped in the mountains were reduced to roots and bark. Ammunition was rationed to a handful of rounds per rifle. Yet the Americans seemed to bring the world with them: jeeps, radios, cigarettes, and even phonographs to play music at night. One Japanese diary captured after the battle read bitterly, "We fight with empty stomachs. They fight with machines and meat." Captured Imperial Army Diary, Leyte, 1944. Context tells the rest of the story. The Pacific War had reached a turning point. 2 years earlier, Japan had expanded across thousands of miles of ocean, from Burma to the Solomon Islands. But by late 1944, the tide had shifted irrevocably. The U.S. submarine campaign strangled Japanese shipping, cutting off supplies of oil, food, and raw materials. American carriers prowled at will, their aircraft burning through bases that once seemed invulnerable. The Philippines became the keystone, a vital link between Japan and its southern resource zone. To lose it meant collapse. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the famed Tiger of Malaya, commanded Japan's 14th Area Army. He inherited 260,000 men spread across the archipelago, but most were ill-equipped and poorly supplied. By contrast, the Americans landed with precision. The invasion fleet for Leyte alone contained more than 700 ships, including 18 escort carriers, 6 battleships, and dozens of cruisers. The aerial umbrella numbered thousands of aircraft, from F-6F Hellcats to B-24 Liberators. Pacific Fleet Log, October 1944. Against this storm, Japanese hopes of reinforcement dwindled into desperation. The psychological clash became clear in the prisoners' faces. Raised on tales of American decadence and cowardice, they instead saw men hardened but confident, machines endless in supply, and a chain of command that never seemed to falter. Radios crackled non-stop with updates, grid coordinates, casualty reports, and requests for airstrikes. The sound of coordination itself, the invisible web binding infantry, armor, artillery, and air power, seemed almost supernatural to those who had lived in isolation, cut off from Tokyo for months. Signal Corps Intercept, 1944, for the American soldiers, the women's astonishment was unspoken but palpable. Many of these GIs were farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, and miners from Pennsylvania. They carried with them the industrial might of their homeland, the Ford assembly lines that had shifted from cars to tanks, the Chicago plants that churned out rations by the ton, and the Bell Labs that refined communications equipment. Every step forward was a testament to the men and women working tirelessly thousands of miles away. War Production Board Report, 1945. The women saw not just soldiers but the shadow of entire cities marching beside them. As the column pushed onward, thunderclouds gathered. Tropical rains began to hammer the landscape, turning roads into swamps of mud. Yet the American vehicles pushed on, engineers laying down steel matting, Seabees constructing makeshift bridges overnight. The prisoners, soaked and shivering, could only marvel. Where their own army faltered, bogged down by the jungle, the enemy built pathways through it. One Japanese nurse would later remark, "It was as if they conjured roads from the earth itself." Bundesarchiv, oral testimony translation, numbers sealed the sense of inevitability. By the end of December 1944, over 400,000 American troops had landed across the Philippines. Reinforcements arrived daily, their uniforms dry, their supplies abundant. The prisoners watched transports unloading crates of ammunition, gasoline drums, and medical equipment in a tide that never seemed to ebb. Against this backdrop, the Japanese command issued desperate orders for suicide counterattacks, banzai charges that ended in slaughter. Entire battalions were erased overnight. MacArthur Staff Diary, December 1944. The female prisoners were eyewitnesses not only to defeat, but also to a revelation. They had believed the Empire's soldiers could endure any hardship and could outlast any foe. Instead, they saw that endurance meant little when the enemy had mastered connection. Men to machines, front line to rear echelon, soldier to commander to factory worker 10,000 miles away. In their silence, in their widened eyes, lay the shock of a worldview collapsing. Captured Nurse's Memoir, 1946. And yet, what they witnessed on those muddy Philippine roads was only the surface. The real secret, the hidden force behind the American advance, was not just numbers or supplies. It was something more subtle, more invisible, more decisive. It was the network that bound every rifleman to artillery miles away, every patrol to aircraft overhead, and every commander to maps alive with movement. It was the unseen advantage that the Japanese never fully understood until it was far too late. What these women saw was only the beginning. The true explanation lay hidden in the crackle of the radios, in the hum of machinery, and in the minds of the engineers who built the invisible web of war. And that secret would be revealed in the battles to come. February 23, 1945. A gray dawn over the ridges of Iwo Jima. The island smolders under days of bombardment, craters stretching like open wounds across the volcanic ash. In the labyrinth of tunnels beneath Mount Suribachi, Japanese officers huddle over maps lit by a single lantern. They brace for another American assault, expecting confusion, piecemeal charges, and blind bombardment. Instead, what they hear shocks them, a rapid-fire chorus of voices over enemy radios, perfectly coordinated, flowing with confidence. Above, artillery shells find their marks with uncanny accuracy. Waves of Marines move as if guided by an unseen hand. To the defenders, it feels impossible. To them, Americans should have been stumbling in chaos. Instead, their attacks are synchronized with a precision the Japanese cannot fathom. Imperial Japanese Army Tunnel Notes, Iwo Jima, 1945. The hidden advantage lay in technology, an advantage invisible to the eye, yet devastating on the battlefield. American soldiers carried compact, rugged FM radios like the SCR-300, designed by Motorola's engineers under the leadership of Daniel E. Noble. Unlike the older AM sets favored by other armies, these radios used frequency modulation, which is resistant to static and interference. In the jungle, in the storm, even amid the volcanic haze of Iwo Jima, they cut through the noise. Units could talk to one another clearly and instantly, without fear of garbled messages. Technical Manual TM11 to 242, 1944. A lieutenant at the front could call artillery support within minutes. A patrol cut off in the jungle could summon tanks to its aid. The network was alive, flexible, and responsive. In contrast, Japanese forces relied on wired telephones or runners carrying messages through lethal terrain. Radio units they did possess were bulky, fragile, and relied on scarce batteries. Their signals often drifted into static, and commanders complained bitterly about orders delayed or lost entirely. Imperial Army Signal Corps Report, 1945. On Leyte and later at Iwo Jima, Japanese diaries reflect confusion, attacks mistimed, counterattacks unsupported, and artillery firing blind. Dramatized composite quote, "We strike into the void. They strike with eyes everywhere." The SCR 300 weighed 35 pounds, was carried on a backpack frame, and had its antenna stretching high above the Marine who bore it. But despite its size, it transformed the tempo of battle. The range stretched to 3 miles over rough terrain, farther on open ground. Frequencies could be shifted quickly to avoid jamming. The set could operate for 40 hours on a single battery. War Department Signal Field Note, 1944, for infantry squads. The smaller SCR 536 handy-talkie provided short-range communication, linking platoons like nerves firing in a living body. With these, commanders no longer guessed. They knew. Behind this revolution was America's industrial engine. Motorola factories in Chicago worked night and day, producing tens of thousands of units. Civilian engineers, many exempt from the draft, labored under secrecy, refining circuits, improving ruggedness, and testing sets in rain chambers and sand tunnels. Women on the assembly line soldered connections, wrapped coils, and packed radios into crates bound for the Pacific. Each radio carried the fingerprints of countless unseen workers. War Production Board Report, 1945. On the battlefield, Marines spoke into microphones, unaware of the hands that had shaped their lifelines. The Japanese prisoners who had stared wide-eyed at American abundance were now confronted with its invisible form. A single Marine patrol could carry more communication capacity than an entire Japanese regiment. Reports captured after the war revealed disbelief. One officer noted, "They seemed to have radios for every man. Even the smallest squad could summon fire as if a general commanded them." U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The psychological toll was immense. To fight an enemy who seemed to anticipate every move was to fight against shadows armed with foresight at Iwo Jima. This hidden advantage became unmistakable. The battle began on February 19th, when 70,000 Marines stormed the beaches against 21,000 dug-in defenders. The Japanese plan relied on inflicting maximum casualties by disrupting landings and breaking coordination. Instead, the Americans advanced in waves, their movements stitched together by radio nets. When a bunker spat fire, forward observers called naval guns within minutes. When tanks bogged down, engineers received word and raced with bulldozers. U.S. Navy Shore Bombardment Report, February 1945. The battlefield became a tapestry of moving parts. Every thread woven together by radio signal. The Japanese, sealed in their underground tunnels, listened to the chatter of enemy sets, unable to decipher it but horrified by its sheer intensity. Their own communications faltered, lines cut by bombardment, runners killed by shrapnel, batteries drained beyond replacement. A single mistimed counterattack on February 21st saw hundreds of men surge from tunnels into interlocking American fire, annihilated in minutes. Survivors recalled bitterly, "They knew we were coming before we moved." Post-war interrogation, Tokyo, 1946. Even more decisive was the integration of air support. American aviators orbited overhead, their radios tuned to ground frequencies. Marine air controllers crouched behind rocks, speaking into SCR 300s, guiding Corsairs onto Japanese gun positions with frightening speed. Pilots later remarked that never before had close air support been so precise, so immediate. Marine Corps Aviation Memoir, 1946. The island's defenders watched in despair as fire rained down. Wherever Marines pointed, the technological leap was not only one of hardware, but also of doctrine. U.S. forces had learned bitter lessons in North Africa, where poor communication had led to chaos at Kasserine Pass. By 1944, doctrine had shifted decisively toward decentralization. Radios empowered junior leaders to act with initiative, knowing they could coordinate instantly with higher command. Army Training Circular 29-5, 1944. What the Japanese perceived as supernatural foresight was, in truth, the fruit of both invention and adaptation. Numbers underscore the transformation. By war's end, the United States had produced more than 200,000 SCR, 300 units, and over 150,000 handy-talkies. Signal Corps Procurement Report, 1945, Japan, by contrast, fielded a fraction, often fewer than a dozen serviceable radios in entire divisions. On Iwo Jima, American forces suffered staggering losses, nearly 7,000 dead and 20,000 wounded, but they advanced inexorably, their communication nets ensuring no sacrifice was wasted. Japanese defenders, cut off and blind, were bled dry. With 20,000 killed and only a few hundred taken prisoner, the decisive moment came on February 23rd, when Marines raised the flag atop Mount Suribachi. That image would circle the world. Yet beneath the iconic photograph lay the invisible scaffolding of coordination. The climb was covered by artillery called in over radios, the perimeter secured by squads linked together in real time. To the surviving Japanese prisoners, male and female alike, the realization was inescapable. They had been outmatched not only in steel but also in signal. Associated Press Dispatch, February 1945, dramatized composite quote, "We thought courage could overcome hunger. We thought we could outlast machines. But we did not understand. They fought as one body, every part speaking to the other." The prisoners' disbelief mirrored that of their commanders. General Kurabayashi himself, architect of Iwo Jima's defenses, noted before his death that American coordination was unlike anything he had witnessed. His fragmented messages, sent through runners, often arrived hours late. Meanwhile, American counter-battery fire struck within minutes. Imperial Staff Notebook, Iwo Jima, 1945, in his final dispatch, admitted, "Their strength lies not only in weapons, but in how they connect." Thus the mystery glimpsed on Leyte, the abundance, the confidence, the invisible edge, was revealed. It was not mere material wealth, but the mastery of communication, engineered in laboratories, soldered in factories, and carried on the backs of soldiers into the heart of battle. Radios had turned armies into organisms, each part aware, each strike amplified. Yet this was not the end. For the true impact of this advantage would extend far beyond Iwo Jima, beyond the Pacific, into the very doctrine of modern warfare. The question now was not whether the Japanese prisoners could believe what they saw, but how the entire world would adapt once the war was over. The war's end drew closer with each passing month of 1945. Across the Pacific, shattered Japanese units surrendered in pockets of exhaustion. For those taken prisoner, women as well as men, the realization was stark. They had not been defeated by bravery lost or spirit broken, but by something deeper, harder to grasp. They had faced an enemy who seemed to march with the strength of a nation at its back, every rifle linked to a factory floor thousands of miles away, every squad bound together by signals that never ceased. That unseen edge, the power of communication, had shaped not only battles but the very psychology of war itself. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946, captured diaries and interrogations revealed a consistent theme: despair at the Americans' endless coordination. Japanese nurses, clerks, and soldiers alike wrote of an enemy who never seemed blind. Captured diary, Manila, 1945. Post-war analysts called it the morale multiplier. Radios did more than summon fire. They reassured the soldier in the foxhole that he was not alone. When a Marine crouched in the mud and spoke into his handy-talkie, he knew artillery listened, tanks moved, and planes circled. That certainty gave confidence. For the Japanese, isolated in bunkers with silent wires and absent orders, the silence itself bred fear. This effect rippled upward. American commanders, from battalion to corps, enjoyed a clarity of battlefield awareness their adversaries lacked. Reports flowed upward in minutes, maps updated in real time, and reinforcements dispatched before gaps widened. In contrast, Japanese officers often discovered disasters hours too late. At Leyte, entire battalions vanished before headquarters even knew they had attacked. MacArthur Staff Report, 1945. The disparity fractured Japanese morale, creating a perception of futility. No plan could survive against an enemy who reacted faster than thought. Strategically, the advantage shaped campaigns. The island-hopping strategy depended not just on ships and planes, but on the ability to coordinate them across vast distances. Radio nets bound together naval bombardment groups, amphibious landings, air cover, and supply chains. The invasion of Okinawa in April 1945 showcased this in full. Over 1,500 ships supported 180,000 troops, their movements synchronized by radio frequencies mapped across the Pacific. Every transport convoy, every carrier air patrol, and every Marine rifle company became a node in a vast living network. U.S. Navy Operation Iceberg Report, 1945, Japanese counterattacks. Launched with courage but little coordination, broke apart against this mesh of steel and signal. On the psychological front, Allied morale surged. Soldiers trusted their leaders because they could hear them, literally. A colonel's voice could reach a platoon in the field. A squad leader could call for medical evacuation knowing his men would not be left behind. Dramatized composite quote, "The radio was our lifeline. With it, we never felt abandoned." For Japanese prisoners who witnessed this, the realization was jarring. Their own soldiers often died unseen, unheard, cut off in ravines or tunnels. Survivors confessed after the war that isolation weighed heavier than hunger. Post-war prisoner interrogation, 1946. Behind the front lines, engineers and technicians sustained the edge. Signal Corps units repaired radios under fire, swapping tubes and soldering joints in foxholes. Factories back home scaled production to staggering levels. Western Electric produced vacuum tubes by the millions. Motorola refined circuits to endure jungle humidity. War Production Board Report, 1945. Civilian inventors like Daniel E. Noble, who had pioneered FM technology before the war, saw their theories tested under fire. Each success was measured not in laboratories, but in lives saved when artillery struck where it was needed. The war was fought by riflemen, but won in part by men in white coats and women with soldering irons. The human cost, however, was immense. Radios could summon support, but they also made battle deadlier. At Iwo Jima and Okinawa, American units could mass firepower with unprecedented speed, obliterating Japanese strongpoints in minutes. For defenders, this meant annihilation without warning. For attackers, it meant advancing into landscapes of ruin, the air filled with the acrid smell of cordite and scorched flesh. Veterans recalled that the efficiency of coordination made killing impersonal, almost mechanical. Marine Corps Oral History, 1947. The invisible edge sharpened war into something relentless. As the war ended, its legacy began to crystallize. Analysts in Washington pored over reports, noting that radio coordination had not just aided victory, it had defined it. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey concluded, superiority in communication created superiority in tempo. The enemy could not match speed with courage alone. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. In Tokyo, Japanese officers admitted under interrogation that their doctrine had underestimated technology, clinging instead to the belief that spirit could overcome material disparity. That belief died in the tunnels of Iwo Jima and the caves of Okinawa. This lesson echoed into the Cold War. NATO doctrine embraced what the Japanese had failed to grasp. That communication was the nervous system of modern armies. In Korea, Vietnam, and later the Gulf War, the U.S. military built upon the networks first forged with the SCR-300 and handy-talkie. From jungle radios to satellite links, the thread remained the same. Connection meant survival. Army Field Manual FM 24-18. 1965. By Desert Storm, entire armored divisions moved as one, guided by radios that traced their lineage back to the Motorola engineers of 1943. For Japan, the defeat reshaped identity. The women who had once stared in disbelief at American soldiers carried their memories into post-war life. In interviews decades later, Some spoke of the surreal moment they realized America's strength was not magic, but industry and science applied with discipline. Others admitted to bitterness that their own nation had sent them into a war without equipping them for survival. Japanese Nurse Memoir, 1970. The lesson was seared into national policy. In the new Japan, technology and industry would define power, not martial spirit alone. The invisible advantage also influenced culture. The image of American abundance, the GI with his radio, his rations, and his cigarettes, became part of the mythology of victory. Veterans recalled the comfort of hearing voices through static, the reassurance that somewhere beyond the shellfire, someone was listening. For Japanese veterans, the silence of broken wires became a symbol of defeat. Psychological Warfare Division Report, 1946. The contrast etched itself into memory. One side connected, the other isolated. As decades passed, historians returned to those moments when Japanese prisoners first laid eyes on their captors. Their disbelief was not just about size or strength, but about an unseen force they could not name. Today we understand it as the beginning of network-centric warfare, a doctrine that would dominate the 20th century and beyond. The American soldier of 1944 was not merely a man with a rifle. He was a node in a vast system of signals and supply. That realization reshaped the world. Naval War College Review, 1952. In the end, the lesson is stark. Firepower wins battles. Courage sustains armies. But connection wins wars. The Japanese female prisoners who stared across muddy Philippine roads and volcanic beaches had seen the future of conflict without knowing its name. They saw a force that was never alone, a machine made of men and radios, a nation speaking with one voice. Dramatized closing line. We could not believe our eyes. But it was not their strength we feared most. It was that they always seemed to know, always seemed to be together. Against that, we were already defeated.